Cisco has more than one operating system choice. Which one should you choose? Stick around to learn more.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to more of the Cisco CCT. We're going to talk about Cisco operating systems. Ronnie, what are some of the goals for this episode? I thought there was one iOS to rule them all.
Well, at one time, there probably was just one OS to rule them all, but because the very fact that Cisco continued to buy equipment is kind of the key. Now, when it comes down to what our goal is, right, is to at least get you familiar with what it might look like and some of the commands that you can actually do. And the neat thing is relatively the same, okay? But you do need to at least be able to identify that, and so we'll run a couple of different commands in each one so that we can see how it actually ends up looking and what you might encounter. Now, when we start talking about something like that, right, what's the best way to actually go about it? Well, I could have made a table, and Wes, we could have just kind of talked about it back and forth in the table. But the great thing is we have, well, equipment, but the other thing that we have, of course, is the access to the Cisco CML, the Cisco Modeling Labs, that gives us access to all four of the types that we want to talk about. So Wes is actually going to help us out here as we begin. So Wes, we're going to kind of do this a little bit differently here. You pick one, and we'll actually go ahead and we'll start with that one. Wes is actually going to demonstrate this too.
All right, Ronnie, what do you say we start with an oldie but goodie? Let's start with iOS. That's the one I got launched here.
All right, so let's talk about this iOS for a moment, because it may not really, as far as the interface goes, looks any differently than what we have. But let's go ahead and we'll start typing here. So type in enable.
Okay. Oops. We'll try it with spelling it right.
Yep. And then from this point, we can go ahead and type in like show version again. And as we get started here, you can actually end up seeing, like, even in the information that we're seeing right away underneath that word show version up there, you'll see where it says Cisco iOS software.
Okay.
And that's probably the first thing that will give you a clue about what you're actually taking a look at. Now, when we start talking about this idea of what this is like, okay, so remember that we're talking about operating systems. So if you have any familiarity with computers at all, every computer runs an operating system.
Sure.
Cisco's base operating system for a long time, and in most routers and switches, okay, has been the Cisco iOS. Now, the way that this one kind of works characteristically, right, is that it's what we call a monolithic operating system. And that means when you go ahead and you run it, it is all that is running, okay? That is the only thing that is running. The CPU is not trying to do 6 different services in the background. It's not trying to do a whole bunch of different things. It is saying, hey, I have this particular computer, and that's pretty much it. So it all is actually done to serve whatever this operating system's function is. So it runs as the base operating system. All of the functionality in terms of application, that is what it's designed to do. Now, for those that actually have played around a little bit in virtualization platforms, this is where the iOS kind of eats you up a little bit. If you actually run anything like GNS3, when you first run that, okay, it's going to go ahead and eat up your CPU. You have to actually hit something called the idle PC value to make that lower down. But remember that the Cisco iOS is saying what? The CPU belongs to me. I can use it however I want to. So it tends to chew it up at 100%. Well, that's not good for your actual PC if you're running a virtualization platform as well. So you have to actually be able to do something like that, because the Cisco iOS is not expecting to find an underlying virtualization platform that's there, nor is it expecting to actually have to deal with anything like that. So this monolithic operating system has actually been around forever, and probably the one that 95% of us who've dealt with Cisco hardware is familiar with.
I tell you, Ronnie, I could have used that piece of advice about 10 years ago when I first run GNS3 on my PC, and it about melted the processor, because you are not kidding. It kept it at 100% until those images were, again, whatever it was that you said that brought that processing down.
Yeah, it will do it. It's the idle PC value inside of GNS3 there,
Gotcha.
and you have to be able to run that and make sure that ends up working. So more familiar, if you run Cisco Catalyst switches, this is probably what you actually see running. The ISR routers, the 3750s, the idea of the 2800s that we've been using, 2900s, 3800s, you'll probably see a lot of this actually out there. So it's not exactly a big deal, but you know, this is probably the one that we're all kind of start with. All right, so Wes, let's go ahead and take a look at another one here.
Okay.
And let's see if we can actually try and
All
figure
right.
out what we normally run into.
How about this one? I'm going to go ahead and here is, let me hit the enter key.
Oh, yeah.
This is iOS -XE.
Yeah. Now this one here, I went ahead and named the host so that we could identify them easily. That's kind
Well,
of the
thank
key,
you.
right? But it's not really a lot different. Notice the beginning here is iOS, which says, hey, we share something with this, but this is actually a little bit different. Let's go ahead and type in enable again, and you'll see that it's really not going to bring in anything different for you. And let's go ahead and type in show version again. And now as we start seeing that, notice there once again, yep, Cisco iOS XE.
Okay.
Now what the heck is the XE about, and why is this so different? Okay, this is an improvement upon the idea of the iOS. And the way that this one ends up working, Wes, a little bit more, is that they've actually separated out the functionality of how this works. So now Cisco hardware that runs this iOS XE, the operating system is Linux.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you might, well, somebody may get picky on it, but overall though, it's a Linux operating system at the base. There's a specific distro, but I can't remember what it is. Okay.
Sure.
But in other words, it says, hey, when you install this thing, what you're really running underneath is Linux. The iOS part, in other words, the part that you and I are interacting with and all that, it runs as an application.
Okay.
So that's all it does. Instead, it's actually doing that. Now you might wonder, like, why the heck would you do that? Because if something goes wrong with the application itself, it doesn't bring down what?
The whole kernel.
The whole kernel.
Okay. You gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
So the idea of the improvement here is what we're talking about and how this actually ends up working. But you see the commands that we're running, it actually works perfectly fine. Let's go ahead and hit our space bar all the way down towards the bottom there.
Okay.
And let's type in show inventory. And this is not going to work in our virtualization platform, but actually, I'm lying to you. Okay, so this works perfectly fine.
And there is an SN there. No
Yeah.
kidding. Okay.
So we might see something like this. Notice it actually gives us a chassis. It tells us what this is normally going to be a part of. There's modules, you name it. It actually gives us some of this different stuff as well. So sometimes you might see this, sometimes you won't, especially if you're in a virtualized platform.
Sure.
I just kind of realized that. I was surprised at this one because I think last time I ran something like this, I tried that and it was like, yeah, I don't even have that command anymore.
Usually the virtualization abstracts that.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It says, yeah, this is not recognizing anything that would normally be in regular Cisco hardware, so why am I going to report it?
Interesting.
So that's what we're seeing. But you do see, like, after, like, that third one down there, the module FO, I think, description, Cisco CSR one, the embedded service processor, it says, I don't see an embedded processor here. So it actually gives us that information as well. So remember, iOS, monolithic operating system, iOS XE, underlying Linux, and then on top of that is the iOS that you and I are actually fairly familiar with that runs on top of that. All right, Wes, what's our next one?
All right, let's see here. Third up here is going to be NXOS with a login verification.
So this is the one that's done by default this way, which is weird. Okay, so when you first boot one of these up, usually when you're running an NX system, okay, it tends to require a ton of additional resources in terms of RAM.
Okay.
So like some of them actually can require like 16 gigs of RAM or more. This one is I think is a lighter weight image is what we have here, but I think it actually already takes up 8 gigs of RAM if I remember, just to run a command line version of this thing.
That's a lot
so
of
just
RAM.
Yeah, it's a lot for this.
With everything dedicated to that specific piece of hardware.
Yeah,
That is a lot of
it's
RAM.
a lot. Now, this is where we start getting into that more specialized environment that we're talking about a little bit more as well, okay? So this type on the NXOS, I was trying to make sure I was reading it right, okay? This is where we would see this more than likely inside of data centers. We probably aren't going to see this in, in a rack in a regular business, but inside of a data center, we'll probably see the NXOS even more. Now, this is an evolution from their SAN network is what it's actually from. There's actually an operating system out there called SAN OS, SAN-OS is what they've come. But now they've actually kind of implemented this because the SAN technology actually works so well into the NXOS that they wanted to do, and that's fine. Now, the reason why this is important right here, Wes, is that instead of actually allowing us in the Cisco iOS to actually define a username and password and it automatically just says you can get the base user what it does, this can automatically give you predefined levels of permissions. Okay. So at the beginning here, when we talk about the NSOX login, start off with admin. So type in admin, and then now it's asking for a password. Now, this is the one that by default requires you to actually have a complex password as well. Okay. So this one is going to be Cisco, but with a capital C.
Okay.
Don't hit enter yet. Yep.
Okay.
And you ready to type that in?
Yep.
Okay. And then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and an exclamation point. if I told you right. Now, it looks like it's thinking about it, so I may not have told. So let's try it again. So let's do Cisco.
Well, I
Or
would not.
wait, hold on. That's yep.
But is that the right password? We'll check it
Yes,
out now.
that is the right password.
Let's try that again.
If that one doesn't work, that means I didn't give you the right username, but we'll find out here in a moment.
All right. Well, I wouldn't put it past the user error here. There we go. Yes,
okay.
Perfect.
So now, notice that you're in here, and we've got a lot of information there because it's saying, hey, look, this is strictly used for evaluation or demonstration. No big deal here. Let's type in show version again.
Okay.
Let's see what we get this time, okay?
All right.
So once again, at the very top, you actually end up seeing, there it is, the Nexus operating system. So that helps us to identify this. And you can even see it at about middle of the screen there, where it actually tells us, hey, this is a demo version. This is not full version here that we're actually seeing. Now, let's go ahead and hit our space bar all the way down to the bottom again.
Okay.
And let's try the same thing, show version. And just like we did, okay? So that one actually works. Let's go ahead and see if we can do the show inventory this time.
Sure.
I forgot that we already ran show version. That's why I did that.
Let's try that one. There we go.
Yeah. So notice there's a lot more information here. They even show one like a supervisors in slot 1. They show the idea of the Ethernet module in slot 2, the other Ethernet modules. So each of these would actually be populated differently depending on what we actually really had. But notice that the only one that we really have, only the first 3 do we really have anything up there.
So very scalable on these, you said, because in data centers, so not high availability, high bandwidth, large scalability.
Yeah. Now let's do something a little bit different here. Type in show space IP and then INT. We're going to do abbreviation here. Space brief, BR. Yep. And nothing. All right, so that's fine. It's saying, hey, nothing's actually configured, but let's do this. Let's type in show run or show running config.
Running config, okay.
And go ahead and hit your space bar again and keep going.
Okay.
And look, there's actually interfaces there. Keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right.
Keep going. Keep going.
I think this is a big switch, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty big switch, so you might see something like that as well.
Okay.
But notice they actually have a lot of information there. The MAC address is showing for each one. It tells you that this is, when you see no switch port, it means it's a routed port working in our configuration here. This one goes all the way down to Ethernet 4/48
48,
is what we actually end up seeing. So there's a lot of different ones that are here, okay? So that is our third one, just to give you an example of what you see. But Wes, it doesn't really seem any more complicated than the iOS.
No, other than the fact that I can't type. No, it's pretty much the same when it comes to the login.
All right, so let's do our fourth one here.
Okay, last one. I wish I could tell you which one this is, Ronnie, but this one isn't really letting me know much.
Oh, yeah. This one's a little bit stranger here, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and type in Cisco.
Okay.
And this one doesn't require any password complexity. And then Cisco. Unless I got it wrong. All right. Now, Wes, it looks a little bit different, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Yeah. So now we're actually saying, hey, this is actually maybe a little bit different than what we're actually used to.
Are these
being
routing
able to
ports?
see.
These wouldn't be routing. What's the RP stand for?
Yeah, that one is, now that you ask, I can't really remember off the top of my head, but they stand for the different slots that are actually available in there. So that's what you actually see. But it may be a routed port for all I know, but just kind of realize this one's a little bit different. And then, of course, that latest one there says CPU, that's actually saying on the chassis is what we're also seeing there too. Okay. Now, let's type in show version. And let's see what it actually gives us. What does it give us there?
iOS XR?
Yep, iOS XR is what it actually tells us.
6.3.6 or 0.1.
Yeah, now this one we'll more than likely find inside of a service provider. I couldn't remember what the name was. The service provider is what we'll actually end up seeing here. So that's probably what it's designed for. Okay, it's optimized inside of that server service provider environment, and that means it's highly scalable. You can continue to add stuff in there. And the neat thing is, Wes, because it's a service provider level type, when we're running the iOS XR, we're expecting it to even upgrade while the thing is still on.
I'll tell you some things I noticed right away here is that it does have a form of Linux under there. At least the bootloader is Grub. And the other thing I noticed too is that it's running Pentium Celeron processor.
Yeah.
Which is different, because while we're talking about ASICs, this is a specific CPU line.
Right. And that's because everything is pretty much done in the ASICs, and so it doesn't really matter what the general processor is too much.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's what we end up seeing. Now, The other thing that you can also, of course, see here as you continue through, notice configuration register. Oops, it doesn't. Let's see if we can go back. I don't know if we can find it exactly. Oh, yeah, configuration register right about in the middle of the screen there, where you see, yep, it's on node, and it tells you kind of that same format that you actually end up seeing.
Yep.
That this is kind of the base model, and there's that 0102, which we told you was the standard one that we normally see. The disk there that we see, of course, is the regular hardware of the flash that we're normally taking a look at. And then, of course, all the other things that you see. Now, the reason why this is important is that there's different functionalities in the iOS XR that you can enable and disable as you need to without ever having to actually turn the thing off. Okay. So a lot of that actually is going to work. Let's go ahead and let's type in another command here at the bottom as we go on through. And this time, let's do show environment.
Okay.
I was trying to make sure I read that right as well. Let's see if it lets us do that one. It may not. Environment. See, this is where the virtualization side says, yeah, I'm not going to actually show that one. Let's see if the other one will actually work here. Let's type in show platform. Let's see if it allows us to do that. Nope. Yep. It says it's there. Okay. So there it is. It actually does show us the idea of the platform, and that's the node that it's on.
Okay.
And then, of course, the type. It shows us some different things, but Wes, again, no real difference. This shouldn't cause us any consternation to actually be able to get some information.
Yeah. I mean, the text is a little bit different, but as far as the output, the look, I mean, I wouldn't really know the difference.
Yeah, so you might be wondering, like, why did I emphasize this? Because you're going to encounter them, and you might go, this is a little bit scary, but Wes, what did we find out?
It's really all the same. You just have to know the environment you're in.
Yeah, the environment, but we did see, like, underlying, right?
Yeah.
There are differences that are out there. They're optimized for different types of environment and different types of usages.
Sure.
Unless you're really, your business is going so well, you decide to go for iOS XR routers, you're probably going to spend a house payment or more. Well, let's say maybe a whole year's of house payment.
Extra real estate, probably.
It's a lot. Now you're starting to talk about cost, right?
Okay.
The iOS is probably the most, cost efficient of them all, but it doesn't always suit the purposes that we need. So just realize you might see different ones that are out there. But the great thing is, if you know a basic set of commands, you can probably go ahead and work with them and not even really worry too much about it, regardless of whether it's a couple of $1,000 switch or a $20,000 switch. Ooh. Yeah.
All right, very good. So in this episode, remember that we got to look at, well, the different types of iOSs, plenty of them out there, and, well, when you get into them, not a lot of difference in the interface, but certainly a lot of difference in the functionality, so be able to recognize that for your CCT exam. Speaking of CCT, we've got a lot more exciting content, not enough time in this episode, so stay tuned.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.